Who am I? A physical body? A soul? A combination of both?
Hi there, welcome to Pithy Polemics. We're a group of friends who are interested in discussing topics in philosophy, theology, history, fantasy, and more. My name is James Liang. This is the 11th video in a chapter-by-chapter series on Brian Davies' book, The Thought of Thomas Aquinas, which provides an overview of Aquinas' positions on a number of theological issues. In this video, I'll be discussing chapter 11 of the book, Being Human, which discusses Aquinas' understanding of what human beings are from a Christian perspective. Before Davies explains Aquinas' thoughts on the topic, he briefly explicates two popular competing theories of human constitution. The first of these is dualism, which says that people are minds or souls that contingently have a body. On this view, the mind or the soul is the center of a person's thoughts and feelings and interacts with the body to produce actions. The other view is called physicalism, which says that people are identical with their physical bodies. On this view, people aren't composed of both matter and an independent mental substance. Rather, people are just made of physical matter. Their mental properties are just identical to, or derivative of, their physical properties. Their mental states depend entirely on their brain states.
So, which view does Aquinas accept?
Neither. Aquinas rejects both views and opts for a kind of middle position. Instead of saying that we're either physical or mental substances or a mixture of each, he says that we're simultaneously physical and mental substances. For Aquinas, anything that's alive has a soul, so although we're identical with our bodies are ensouled in their very nature because we have an intellect and a will. Therefore, we have both a body and a soul, but we're not composed of a body and a soul.
What? I don't get it. If my soul is distinct from my body, but I'm identical to my body, then how can I still have a soul?
That does sound kind of paradoxical, doesn't it? Well, Aquinas' response is that the soul is just that thing which animates our bodies and distinguishes us from material objects that aren't alive, like tables and chairs. Yet it isn't some separate, independently existing thing that merely interacts with our bodies. It's something that subsists in and is coextensive with our bodies. Using the Aristotelian terms we discussed in previous chapters, the soul is the form of the body.
Okay, I think I get it. The soul is the form that determines what kind of body we have. But James, when a body dies, it loses its form. So what happens when we die? Do we stop existing?
Surprisingly, Aquinas says yes. We are, by definition, rational animals, so once we lose the physical animal aspect of that definition, we technically don't exist anymore.
Wait a minute. Doesn't Jesus tell the thief on the cross, "Today you will be with me in paradise"? Are you calling Jesus a liar?
Not quite. While it's true that Aquinas thinks we don't survive our physical death, this isn't to say that our souls don't. For Aquinas, something dies when it loses its substantial form. But if you think about it, souls are a kind of substantial form, and substantial forms are immaterial objects that can't lose themselves. So it's possible that God can supernaturally sustain our souls after we physically die. The key point is that we're not identical to our souls, so while our soul survives death, strictly speaking, we don't.
Okay, got it. And at the resurrection, our souls will be rejoined to our physical bodies?
Yup, exactly. The soul is incomplete on its own, and it's limited in its capacities. While it retains the powers of intellect and will, it doesn't have access to all the usual bodily functions we're accustomed to. So the soul longs to be reunited to the body, which actually fits nicely with Paul's description of the soul in the intermediate state as naked and longing to be clothed in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. Some people think that when we're resurrected, even if our old bodies decompose and we get a new resurrection body, we'll still be the same people because there's psychological continuity via our souls in the intermediate state. But Aquinas actually rejects this notion and insists that we must have the exact same body. How that's possible, Aquinas doesn't say. He just insists that it has to be the same body.
Cool. Does Davies have anything else to say?
Yeah, in the last section of the chapter, Davies explains how Aquinas thought about human action. Here he emphasizes two main points, that human actions are voluntary and done on the basis of dispositions. For Aquinas, our actions are voluntary if we have a desire to do them, nothing outside of us causes us to do them. We know what we're doing when we do them, and we're doing them for a purpose. This makes good sense of cases where my arm hit somebody because someone else pushed it. Someone else caused me to do that, so I didn't hit that person voluntarily. Notice also that it allows for voluntarily doing something absent-mindedly. According to these criteria, the agent doesn't have to consciously make a decision to act voluntarily. For example, we don't consciously tell ourselves to walk. It comes naturally to us without having to think about it, but we still walk voluntarily because we have a destination in mind. Another implication of these criteria is that someone acting in ignorance doesn't do so voluntarily. For example, Davies provides the illustration of person A accidentally giving person B poison, thinking it was tea. In this case, person A didn't voluntarily poison person B because person A didn't know the drink was poisoned. That's not to say, though, that every instance of something done in ignorance gets the agent off the hook. For example, a drunk driver might not be aware that he ran over a pedestrian, but he's still responsible for doing so because he voluntarily made the decision to drink and drive. Interestingly, Aquinas also pins responsibility on people who get carried away by their emotions. Even though we use phrases like, "you're out of control," or "what came over you," which imply that the person wasn't acting that way voluntarily at the moment, Aquinas would say that such a person is acting in accordance with his desires, and therefore acting voluntarily. So no matter how passionate or emotional someone gets, he doesn't get to use the excuse that he wasn't himself. Lastly, our actions don't happen in a vacuum. Our lives aren't just made up of a collection of choices that are independent of one another. Every choice we make adds up to form dispositions in us, tendencies that make some choices easier or more natural than others. Davies clarifies here that the kind of tendencies he's talking about aren't habits in the sense of addictions like nail biting or smoking, things that are hard to quit once we start doing them. Rather, they're things that are easier or more natural for us to do the more we do them. He gives the example of fluency in a language. Once someone has practiced speaking in a given language, it becomes very easy and natural for him to speak in that language. But he isn't pulled by some kind of compulsion to speak in that language. It's just an ability he has that would be easy for him to use if he were to choose to. It's something that he has more control over, not less. And that's the end of the chapter.
Alright, James, tell us why you think Aquinas is wrong.
Actually, this time I think Aquinas' view has a lot to commend. Although Davies doesn't mention it by name, the view that Aquinas defends is called Thomistic hylomorphism, and I think Davies does a great job of highlighting how this view differs from the view I like to call simple substance dualism, which says that we're identical to our souls and only contingently attached to a body. Whereas simple substance dualism treats the soul and body as different substances that causally interact with each other, hylomorphism views the soul as the form of the body, the thing that determines what kind of matter something is. If we go back to the Play-Doh analogy, matter is the Play-Doh itself, while the form is the shape that the Play-Doh takes on. Similarly, my soul is what dictates that the matter my body is made of is a human body, and delineates all of its properties and functions. It's not a separate substance that's distinct from my body. As long as I have a human body, I necessarily have a human soul. So I agree with Davies that this view has some considerable advantages over simple substance dualism. On the latter view, we can conceive of our soul being attached to a different body, which takes away from the uniqueness of our individual bodies as part of what makes us, us. Hylomorphism fixes this problem by necessarily tying the soul to a very unique kind of body. Whereas hylomorphism provides more explanatory resources for the causal relationship between the soul and the body, simple substance dualism has to posit a brute causal relationship. Whereas hylomorphism has no problem with scientifically observed correlations between brain complexity and the complexity of mental functioning, simple substance dualism has to do more work to explain why a human soul couldn't be placed in, say, a dog's body and exhibit the same mental functions as a human being. So yeah, Thomistic hylomorphism has a lot going for it. So why don't I accept Aquinas' view? Because actually, it turns out that we can modify substance dualism to get all the benefits of hylomorphism without needing to commit ourselves to the existence of Aristotelian categories like form and matter, or making assertions like we are just our bodies, which, despite Davies' protestations, reek of physicalism. Substance dualists like J.P. Moreland and Richard Swinburne have defended theories in which human persons are compound substances composed of both soul and body, with the soul playing a crucial role in determining the properties and functions of the body. Moreland, in particular, gives the analogy of the soul serving as a kind of blueprint for the body, providing instructions for how the body is supposed to function and bringing a kind of unity to each individual cell the body is composed of. Much like Thomistic hylomorphism, this kind of substance dualism provides a much tighter relationship between the soul and the body that does away with all the weaknesses of simple substance dualism. In fact, Moreland calls his theory Thomistic-like dualism, and Swinburne goes as far as to say that the differences between his theory and Thomistic hylomorphism are almost entirely terminological. So for me, substance dualism still wins out at the end of the day. I also found Davies' section on how the soul survives death very helpful. It's true that if we're not identical to our souls, and our souls are the only thing that survive physical death, then technically speaking, we don't survive death, only our souls do. That may seem counterintuitive, but it does follow naturally from Aquinas' theory of the soul, and I don't think it's inherently problematic theologically. There's also a lot that could be said about the notion of being resurrected with the same exact body as we have right now, but for the sake of brevity, I'll just say that contemporary philosophical theologians working on the resurrection are very open to this idea and offer different accounts of how this happens. If you're interested in learning more about these accounts of the resurrection, I highly recommend watching the Analytic Christian's interviews with various scholars explaining their work on the subject. I put links to some of these videos in the description. The last thing I'll say is that I really like Davies' explanation of Aquinas' criteria for voluntary action. I found the examples he gave really helpful for illustrating each criterion, and I think they make good sense of our everyday intuitions about when someone is responsible for something he did. As far as an introductory account of agency goes, that's pretty good. So that's it for my thoughts. Next time I'll be summarizing chapter 12 of Davies' book, How to Be Happy. Don't go anywhere yet. If you like what we're doing, consider helping us out by hitting the like button, and don't forget to share and subscribe. Also make sure to hit that bell button for notifications. Whether you agree or disagree with me, let me know what you think in the comments down below. For more content like this, come check out some of our other videos on our channel. With that, I'll see you in the next video.